Mike here again. So I'm going to try to make this brief, so forgive me if I don't get to all the points I otherwise would in this video. I'm also aware that it's budget season and that I promised I'd get more into that, and I swear I will. But this is something that needs to get addressed now, and I think I can do it pretty quickly. Craig Minor, Billy Mo Buckbee, this video is personally addressed from me to you because this is a state issue and you're my state representatives, and you need to hear this. I'm aware there's proposed legislation being kicked around in Hartford whose purpose is to make, among a bevy of other things, plastic bags and plastic straws illegal in Connecticut. I won't get into the insanity of banning goods, especially at the state level, and the fundamentally immoral nature of removing the element of consent at gunpoint, consent being something the left seems to only care about when it fits their narrative. Instead, today I'm just going to provide you with the tools you need to put an end to this regulatory overreach in a state that is already way overregulated. In this case, I'm just looking to give you the raw data and information you need to rebut the outright misinformation on which the whole idea to ban plastic bags and plastic straws is based. So if my fellow nutmeggers share my concerns either now or by the end of this video, please share this video so that this information can get to Craig, Billy, and hopefully to the rest of Hartford. As far as I can tell, the whole reason for these bans is to somehow have a reductive effect on what is called leakage, in this case, plastic leakage, which winds its way into the oceans. I'm going to build a case that this is a non-issue, that we figured this out already, and that even conceding all the other arguments, which are easier to rebut, there is no reason to institute this legislation even on an environmental impact claim. I also want you to note that I'm deliberately not using sources that are even right-leaning. In short, I'm making my case as difficult on myself as possible, and I'm going to argue that my claim is still not only absolutely valid, but the better claim. Right off the bat, a total of 5 countries account for roughly 60% of the world's leakage: China, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka. Between 88% and 94% of all plastic leakage not originating in the oceans in the first place comes from 10 rivers, and here they are. Notice how none of them are even in the Western Hemisphere, let alone anywhere near the United States. So where does the US stack up in all of this? That's right, folks. 20th. A third of a billion people living in the third most populous country in the world, and flanked on either side by the 2 largest oceans in the world, is 20th. But let's look closer at this chart. Just 2% of the US's plastic waste is, quote, mismanaged. Notice how the next closest country on this list is more than 5 times that amount. Further, despite our population and productivity, we account for less than 1% of the world's mismanaged waste. And that's before it actually gets to an ocean. If you add up the low range of oceanic leakage in this column to get the total worldwide leakage, and divide the highest estimate of the leakage the US produces by that number, again, to build the best case against my claim as possible, you get less than 3% of the world's oceanic leakage. Conversely, if I were to do the opposite and stack as favorable a claim as possible, we get less than 0.4%. And both of those numbers are only for these 20 countries, which assumes that no other country on Earth has any plastic leakage. So what percentage of the world's leakage does the US account for? Well, according to this pro-ban website, the US and Europe combine to account for 2% of the land-based plastic leakage. If you want a visual representation of a country-by-country account of where the US stacks up, check out this chart from the left-leaning ourworldindata.org. More specifically, when it comes to plastic straws, according to an article from phys.org, which appears to be actually advocating for straw bans, there are apparently 7.5 million plastic straws, quote, lying around America's shorelines, end quote. I won't get into how they arrived at that number and how the methods may be flawed, because even if every single one of those straws was somehow swept into the ocean all at once, they'd account for approximately 0.03% of the roughly 8 million metric tons of plastic that reached the ocean in 2010. And that number could actually be as high as 12 million metric tons if you want to take sciencemag.org's numbers instead. So is all this a coincidence? Is this all just a stroke of luck? No. The reason we, here in the US, don't produce the leakage that you might predict based on our population and our productivity, and even considering the fact that we generate the second most amount of plastic waste in the world, is because we don't mismanage it. More specifically, we actually make sure that the plastic headed for the landfill actually gets to the landfill. And the percent of plastic waste that is finding its way to the landfill rather than being recycled or turned into electricity is on the decline. In fact, if you look at packing material alone, which accounts for the greatest source of both plastic production and plastic waste by far, we're actually sending less of it to landfills per year in even absolute terms and unadjusted for population growth. So then where does all the leakage in the US come from? Well, going back to that Our World in Data article, it appears as though this is strictly a matter of litter. Yeah, that thing that's already illegal and that nobody actually enforces. That's what we're talking about. People hucking garbage out of their truck windows. And it seems to me that if we have a law in the books already outlining this thing, and if we flatly aren't enforcing it, perhaps the better thing to be advocating for would be actually enforcing already existing laws. Because if you're in law enforcement, that's your job. Look, I don't know how we here in the US can do anything to reduce the leakage in other countries, but even if we instituted the most draconian legislation possible, and even if we enforced it with the most barbaric methods of enforcement, and in doing so, reduced our leakage to zero, the environmental impact would be nothing. But Mike, what's the big deal? We're only talking about the banning of plastic bags. Okay, fine. I'll concede your point. This isn't a big deal. So then why are you pushing for the legislation in the first place? So I hope you can now better understand the insanity of this legislation and the claims of those who support it, and can now better prepare a case against it even on their terms. But before I leave, I just have a few questions. What do you do with your plastic grocery bags when you get home from the grocery store? Do grocery bags have to be used to carry groceries? How many of you reuse them for lunch bags, dirty gym clothes, small trash can bags, garbage pickup, etc.? And Craig, Mo, seriously, how many of you have one of these hanging up in your kitchen right now?